In a quiet town nestled in the southern part of the United States, life moved at a slow and predictable pace. The sun rose every morning over rows of modest homes, casting long shadows on streets lined with oak trees. It was a place where everyone seemed to know each other, or so it appeared on the surface. Beneath this veneer of familiarity, however, simmered tensions rooted in deep-seated racial divides that had persisted for generations. These divisions rarely came to light in public, but they were always there, lurking just below the surface, like an undercurrent waiting to erupt. On one such ordinary evening, the tranquility of the town was shattered by an incident that would soon become the talk of the nation. Officer Mark Daniels, a man known for his brash demeanor and controversial behavior, found himself at the center of a storm he could never have anticipated. A veteran police officer with over 15 years on the force, Daniels had built a reputation as someone who didn't mince words. To some, this made him a no-nonsense cop. To others, it painted him as reckless and prejudiced. Over the years, numerous complaints had been filed against him, alleging racially charged remarks and aggressive conduct during routine stops. Yet, despite these accusations, nothing ever stuck. Internal investigations always ended inconclusively, leaving Daniels free to continue patrolling the streets with unchecked authority. That evening, Daniels was cruising through the outskirts of town when his attention was drawn to a black SUV driving ahead. Squinting slightly, he noticed what he believed to be a broken taillight. A minor infraction, but enough justification for him to activate his flashing lights and pull the vehicle over. As he approached the driver's side window, flashlight in hand, Daniels' expression hardened. What he didn't realize at the time was that the person behind the wheel wasn't just any civilian. It was General Marcus Thompson, a decorated war hero whose name commanded respect across military circles. General Thompson had spent decades serving his country, earning medals and accolades for his bravery and leadership. He had led troops through some of the most dangerous missions overseas, risking his life countless times to protect others. Now retired, he lived a quiet life back home, dedicating his time to mentoring young veterans and advocating for their rights. On this particular night, he had simply been running errands, unaware that his journey would take a shocking turn. When Daniels tapped on the window, General Thompson rolled it down politely. "Is there a problem, officer?" he asked calmly, his voice steady and respectful. Daniels ignored the question, instead demanding identification in a tone that bordered on hostility. There was something about the way he spoke, sharp, dismissive, that immediately set the tone for the interaction. General Thompson complied without hesitation, reaching into his glove compartment to retrieve his driver's license and military ID. When he handed both documents to Daniels, the officer glanced at them briefly before sneering. "This don't mean squat here," he snapped, tossing the IDs onto the dashboard. His words hung in the air, heavy with disdain. The general blinked, taken aback by the abruptness of the remark. "I'm sorry, sir," he replied evenly, maintaining his composure. "Can you explain why I've been pulled over?" But Daniels wasn't interested in explanations. Instead, he leaned closer, his face contorted with anger. "You think your fancy rank makes you special? You're just another guy breaking the law tonight." As the tension escalated, passers-by began to notice the scene unfolding by the roadside. Some slowed their cars to get a better look, while others stopped altogether, pulling out their phones to record the encounter. One woman shouted from her car window, "He hasn't done anything wrong." But Daniels paid her no mind, too focused on asserting his dominance over the situation. His body language grew more aggressive, his hands gripping the flashlight tightly, as if ready to use it as a weapon. For General Thompson, the moment felt surreal. Here he was, a man who had faced bullets and bombs on foreign soil, now sitting helplessly in his own car while a police officer berated him. Years of military training kicked in, keeping him calm despite the rising fear coursing through his veins. He kept his hands visible on the steering wheel, careful not to make any sudden movements that might provoke the volatile officer. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability, the realization that his rank, his accomplishments, and his service meant nothing in this moment. Daniels, meanwhile, seemed oblivious to the growing crowd around them. His focus was entirely on General Thompson, fueled by a toxic mix of prejudice and unchecked power. Every word he uttered dripped with contempt, every gesture designed to intimidate. For him, this wasn't just about a broken taillight anymore. It was about control. And he intended to exert it fully regardless of the consequences. Unbeknownst to either man, the cameras rolling nearby would soon change everything, not just for them, but for the entire town. The footage captured not only Daniels' actions, but also the raw emotions etched on the faces of those witnessing the confrontation. Shock, outrage, disbelief, all played out in real time, immortalized in pixels and bytes. Little did they know, this single traffic stop would ignite a firestorm of controversy, forcing the community and the nation to confront uncomfortable truths about race, authority, and justice. And so, what began as an ordinary evening transformed into something far greater, a catalyst for change, a test of integrity, and a story that would leave an indelible mark on all who heard it. As the confrontation between Officer Mark Daniels and General Marcus Thompson escalated, the situation took a chilling turn that no one could have predicted. Daniels' hostility reached a boiling point when he abruptly stepped back from the driver's side window of the SUV, his face flushed with anger. Without warning, he unholstered his gun and pointed it directly at General Thompson's chest. The metallic click of the safety being released echoed in the stillness of the evening, sending shivers down the spines of those watching nearby. Time seemed to freeze as everyone, General Thompson included, processed what was happening. "You think you're better than me?" Daniels barked, his voice trembling with rage. "You ain't nothing. You hear me? Nothing." His words were punctuated by racial slurs, each one laced with venom and hatred. Passers-by gasped audibly, their phones capturing every second of the horrifying scene unfolding before them. One man shouted from across the street, "Put the gun down. He hasn't done anything wrong." But Daniels ignored him completely, his focus entirely on the man sitting calmly inside the vehicle. For General Thompson, the moment felt surreal. Despite years of training to remain composed under pressure, he couldn't help but feel a surge of fear coursing through his body. Yet somehow, he managed to keep his hands steady on the steering wheel, refusing to let panic take over. His mind raced as he tried to make sense of the situation. Was this really happening? How had a routine traffic stop spiraled into a life-threatening ordeal? The irony wasn't lost on him. He had faced enemy fire in war zones, yet here he was, unarmed and vulnerable, staring down the barrel of a gun wielded by someone who was supposed to protect and serve. Daniels continued his tirade, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. "I've seen your kind before," he spat, gesturing wildly with the weapon. "Always thinking you're above the law." Each insult cut deeper than the last, not because they came from a place of truth, but because they revealed the deep-seated prejudice driving Daniels' actions. To him, General Thompson wasn't just another civilian. He represented everything Daniels resented. A successful black man who had achieved more in his lifetime than Daniels ever dreamed possible. The crowd gathered around grew larger as word spread about the unfolding drama. Cars slowed to a crawl. Along the roadside, passengers leaning out windows to catch a glimpse of what was happening. Some recorded videos while others called 911, pleading for backup. Among the bystanders was a young woman named Lisa Carter, who lived 2 blocks away. She had been walking her dog when she noticed the commotion. Horrified by what she saw, she quickly pulled out her phone and began filming. Her hands shook as she zoomed in on Daniels, capturing the officer's menacing stance and the sheer terror etched on General Thompson's face. "Please, sir," General Thompson said finally, breaking the tense silence. His voice was calm but firm, betraying none of the fear he felt inside. "If there's an issue, we can resolve it peacefully." It was a calculated move, an attempt to de-escalate the situation without provoking further aggression. But Daniels only laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "Peacefully? You don't get to tell me how this goes. I'm the one with the power here." By now, several minutes had passed since the initial stop, though it felt like hours to those involved. Backup. Officers arrived on the scene, their sirens wailing as they pulled up behind Daniel's patrol car. Two uniformed figures stepped out cautiously, surveying the chaotic scene before them. They exchanged uneasy glances, clearly unsure how to handle the volatile situation. One of them approached Daniels, trying to reason with him. "Mark, put the gun down," he urged, his tone measured but urgent. "This isn't helping anyone." But Daniels refused to listen. Instead, he turned his fury on his colleagues, accusing them of siding against him. "You all are too soft," he yelled, waving the gun erratically. "He disrespected me. He thinks he's untouchable." The other officers hesitated, caught between defusing the situation and avoiding a potential tragedy. Their hesitation only prolonged the standoff, leaving General Thompson trapped in a nightmare with no end in sight. Back in the crowd, emotions ran high. A middle-aged man named James Peterson stepped forward, unable to stay silent any longer. "Officer, you need to stand down," he shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. "What you're doing is wrong. This man hasn't done anything to deserve this treatment." Others joined in, voicing their outrage and demanding justice. For many, this wasn't just about General Thompson. It was about years of frustration with systemic racism and abuse of power within law enforcement. Seeing such blatant misconduct unfold right in front of them was unbearable. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Daniels reluctantly lowered his weapon. Whether it was due to exhaustion, the growing pressure from his fellow officers, or the realization that the entire incident was being recorded, remained unclear. Whatever the reason, the immediate threat subsided, though the damage had already been done. As the other officers moved to secure Daniels and assess the situation, General Thompson exhaled deeply, his body sagging slightly with relief. He hadn't said a word during the final moments of the standoff, choosing instead to wait patiently until it was safe to speak again. Once the scene stabilized, one of the backup officers approached General Thompson's vehicle. "Sir, are you okay?" he asked gently, his tone apologetic. General Thompson nodded slowly, though his eyes betrayed the trauma he had just endured. "Yes," he replied quietly, "but I'd like to understand why I was stopped in the first place." The officer hesitated before responding, clearly uncomfortable. "We'll look into that, sir. For now, please know we're handling this accordingly." As the officers worked to regain control of the situation, the crowd began to disperse, though the shockwaves of what had transpired lingered in the air. Videos of the incident were already circulating online, sparking outrage across social media platforms. Hashtags like "Down Justice for Thompson" and "Down Brown Accountability Now" trended rapidly, drawing attention from activists, journalists, and concerned citizens nationwide. Within hours, the story went viral, turning General Thompson's name and Officer Daniels' actions into symbols of a much larger conversation about race, authority, and accountability. That night, as General Thompson drove home, he replayed the events in his mind over and over again. Though physically unharmed, he knew the emotional scars would take time to heal. He thought about the countless others who had likely faced similar situations but lacked the platform or support to seek justice. Determined not to let the incident go unnoticed, he resolved to use his experience as a catalyst for change. Little did he know, his decision would set off a chain reaction that would ripple far beyond the small town where it all began. Meanwhile, Officer Daniels sat in a holding cell at the police station, seething with anger and disbelief. Unaware of the storm brewing outside, he clung to the belief that he had acted within his rights. But as the reality of his actions sank in, so too did the knowledge that his career, and perhaps his freedom, was hanging by a thread. The trial of Officer Mark Daniels began on a crisp autumn morning, drawing national attention as cameras lined the steps of the courthouse. Journalists from across the country jostled for position, eager to capture every detail of what promised to be a landmark case. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Rows of spectators filled the benches, some there to support General Marcus Thompson, others curious about the outcome, and a few who still believed in Daniel's innocence. The atmosphere was thick with tension, a palpable mix of anger, hope, and uncertainty. Prosecutors wasted no time laying out their case. They presented damning evidence, starting with the viral videos that had shocked the nation. Played on a large screen in the courtroom, the footage showed Daniels' aggressive behavior, his gun pointed at General Thompson, and the stream of racial slurs he hurled. Gasps rippled through the gallery as jurors watched the chilling scene unfold. "This is not just an isolated incident," the lead prosecutor declared during opening statements. "It's a pattern of abuse rooted in prejudice, enabled by unchecked power." To bolster their argument, prosecutors called witnesses who painted a troubling picture of Daniels' conduct over the years. Former colleagues testified about his frequent use of derogatory language and hostile demeanor toward minority communities. One officer recounted how Daniels once joked about pulling over black drivers simply because they're always up to something. Another described an instance where Daniels refused to assist a Hispanic family stranded on the side of the road, dismissing them as probably undocumented. These testimonies painted Daniels not as a rogue individual, but as part of a larger systemic issue within law enforcement. Perhaps the most explosive revelation came when text messages exchanged between Daniels and other officers were introduced into evidence. The messages contained racist jokes, stereotypes, and disparaging remarks about minorities. In one particularly incriminating exchange, Daniels referred to African Americans as less than human and boasted about intimidating them during traffic stops. Jurors leaned forward, visibly disturbed by the blatant racism captured in black and white. Defense attorneys tried to downplay the texts, arguing they were taken out of context or meant as harmless banter among friends. But their attempts fell flat. The damage had already been done. General Thompson took the stand on the third day of the trial, his presence commanding respect even before he spoke. Dressed in a sharp suit adorned with military medals, he exuded dignity and composure. As he recounted the events of that fateful evening, his voice remained steady though his eyes betrayed the weight of the experience. He described the fear he felt when Daniels drew his weapon, the humiliation of being insulted in front of strangers, and the frustration of having his rank dismissed so callously. "I served my country for decades," he said, pausing to collect himself. And yet, in that moment, none of it mattered. All Officer Daniels saw was the color of my skin. His testimony struck a chord with everyone in the room, including the jury. Several jurors nodded sympathetically, while others scribbled notes furiously. When asked why he hadn't retaliated or lost his temper during the confrontation, General Thompson replied simply, "Because I've seen enough violence in my life. I didn't want to add to it." His response earned murmurs of admiration from the audience, further solidifying his image as a man of integrity and restraint. Defense attorneys fought back fiercely, attempting to cast doubt on the prosecution's narrative. They argued that Daniels had legitimate reasons for stopping General Thompson's vehicle, citing the alleged broken taillight as justification. They also claimed that pointing a gun wasn't inherently unlawful if an officer felt threatened, a point they hammered home repeatedly. To counteract the damaging video footage, they suggested that Daniels' actions were misinterpreted and exaggerated by bystanders seeking attention. At one point, they even accused General Thompson of exploiting the incident for personal gain, implying that his decision to go public was motivated by fame rather than principle. But these arguments failed to sway the court. Witnesses refuted the defense's claims, testifying that General Thompson posed no threat whatsoever during the stop. Bystanders who had recorded the incident reiterated that Daniels' aggression escalated without provocation. Even Daniels' own colleagues admitted under cross-examination that his behavior that night was unprofessional and unwarranted. By the end of the prosecution's case, it seemed clear that Daniels' fate rested not on technicalities, but on the overwhelming evidence against him. As closing arguments approached, both sides delivered impassioned speeches. The prosecution urged the jury to consider the broader implications of their verdict. "This isn't just about one officer or one victim," the lead prosecutor implored. "It's about holding individuals accountable when they abuse their power. It's about sending a message that racism has no place in our society, not on the streets, not in uniform, and certainly not behind a badge." The defense countered by appealing to sympathy, portraying Daniels as a flawed but well-meaning man, caught in a storm of public outrage. Officer Daniels made mistakes, his lawyer conceded. But does that mean we throw away his career and possibly his freedom for one bad decision? Is this really justice? Despite their efforts, the defense's plea rang hollow against the backdrop of irrefutable evidence. After weeks of deliberation, the jury finally reached a verdict. On a rainy afternoon, the courtroom reconvened, packed to capacity. Daniels sat stoically beside his attorney, his face unreadable. General Thompson, flanked by his family and supporters, waited anxiously, clutching Sarah's hand tightly. When the foreman stood to announce the decision, the room fell silent. On the charge of misconduct, guilty, he read aloud. A collective gasp swept through the gallery. On the charge of assault with a deadly weapon, guilty. On the charge of hate crimes, guilty. Each word landed like a hammer blow, sealing Daniels' fate. The judge sentenced him to 5 years, in prison without parole, emphasizing the importance of accountability and maintaining public trust. Cheers erupted outside the courthouse as news of the conviction spread, while inside, Daniels buried his face in his hands, overwhelmed by the reality of his situation. For General Thompson, the verdict brought a sense of closure, but also renewed purpose. Though justice had been served, he knew the fight for equality and reform was far from over. As he addressed reporters gathered outside, he reminded everyone that true change required more than punishments. It demanded systemic transformation. This verdict is a step forward, he said, his voice firm yet compassionate. But let it not be the final step. Let us continue to work together to build a world where everyone feels safe and valued. Daniels' family, meanwhile, vowed to appeal the decision, accusing the court of bowing to public pressure rather than upholding fairness. Their defiance only deepened divisions within the community, highlighting the long road ahead in bridging gaps of understanding and trust. Yet, amidst the controversy, one thing was certain. The trial had ignited conversations that could no longer be ignored. And for better or worse, it had changed the town, and perhaps the nation, forever. The days following the roadside confrontation between Officer Mark Daniels and General Marcus Thompson felt like a whirlwind. News of the incident spread rapidly, fueled by social media posts and viral videos that captured every harrowing moment. Within hours, hashtags like Justice for Thompson and Accountability Now dominated Twitter feeds, Instagram stories, and Facebook timelines. Journalists scrambled to cover the story, while activists seized the opportunity to highlight systemic issues within law enforcement. The small town where it all began suddenly found itself thrust into the national spotlight. For General Thompson, the aftermath was overwhelming. Though he had remained composed during the encounter with Daniels, the emotional toll of the experience became undeniable in its wake. At home, surrounded by his wife Sarah and their 2 teenage children, he struggled to process what had happened. His hands still trembled slightly as he recounted the details to his family, describing how Daniel's gun had been pointed at him, inches away from ending his life. "I've faced danger before," he told them, his voice heavy with emotion. "But never like this, not in my own country, not from someone who swore to protect me." Sarah listened intently, her heart breaking for her husband, but also filled with pride for the way he had handled himself. She knew Marcus wasn't one to seek attention or stir controversy, but she also understood the significance of his position. As a decorated war hero and a respected figure in the community, his voice carried weight. When she suggested he speak publicly about the incident, Marcus hesitated. "I don't want this to define me," he admitted, "but if sharing my story can help bring change, maybe I owe it to others who haven't been as fortunate." Reluctantly, General Thompson agreed to go public. Over the next few days, he gave interviews to major news outlets recounting the events calmly and without malice. He avoided vilifying Daniels personally, instead focusing on broader systemic issues such as racial profiling, police brutality, and the need for accountability. His measured tone and dignified demeanor resonated deeply with viewers, turning him into a symbol of resilience and grace under pressure. People praised his ability to rise above hatred, even when faced with life-threatening circumstances. Social media flooded with messages of support, calling him a beacon of hope in troubling times. Meanwhile, Officer Daniels found himself suspended pending an internal investigation. Stripped of his badge and gun, he retreated into isolation, consumed by anger and denial. To him, the entire ordeal was unjust, a gross exaggeration of a minor traffic stop gone wrong. He refused to acknowledge the gravity of his actions, insisting that he had simply been doing his job. Friends and colleagues distanced themselves, embarrassed by his behavior and fearful of being associated with the scandal. Even Daniels's wife, Lisa, grew increasingly conflicted. While she stood by her husband initially, defending him against accusations, she couldn't ignore the mounting evidence against him. Videos showing his aggressive conduct and racist remarks left her shaken, forcing her to question whether the man she married was truly capable of such cruelty. As the public outcry intensified, local authorities came under immense pressure to act swiftly and decisively. Civil rights organizations demanded justice, filing formal complaints and calling for Daniels' termination. Veterans groups rallied around General Thompson, condemning the treatment he had endured and urging lawmakers to address systemic racism within policing institutions. Meanwhile, protests erupted outside the police department headquarters, drawing hundreds of demonstrators who chanted slogans and held signs reading, "No justice, no peace," and "Protect us, don't threaten us." The atmosphere was electric, charged with both anger and determination. Back at home, General Thompson grappled with the newfound attention. Though grateful for the outpouring of support, he couldn't shake the feeling that his private life had been invaded. Reporters camped outside his house, eager for updates or exclusive statements. Neighbors stopped by to express solidarity, some offering kind words, others asking intrusive questions. Despite the chaos, Marcus remained steadfast in his mission. He partnered with advocacy groups to push for meaningful reforms, including mandatory bias training for officers, stricter oversight mechanisms, and greater transparency in disciplinary actions. His efforts gained traction, inspiring similar movements in other cities across the country. Daniels' legal troubles deepened as investigators uncovered damning evidence during their probe. Text messages exchanged between him and fellow officers revealed a pattern of discriminatory behavior, including racist jokes and derogatory comments about minorities. These discoveries painted a chilling picture of a man whose prejudices weren't isolated incidents, but rather part of a disturbing habit. Internal Affairs recommended criminal charges, citing misconduct, assault with a deadly weapon, and hate crimes among the offenses. Prosecutors wasted no time filing a case, setting the stage for what promised to be a high-profile trial. As preparations for the trial began, tensions in the town reached a fever pitch. Supporters of General Thompson organized rallies, demanding accountability and justice. They argued that Daniels' actions were emblematic of a larger problem, one that needed immediate correction. Opponents, however, claimed that Daniels was being scapegoated, blaming political correctness and public outrage for overshadowing due process. Some even accused the media of sensationalizing the incident to fuel divisive narratives. The divide grew wider, pitting neighbor against neighbor and exposing long-standing rifts within the community. Amidst the turmoil, General Thompson remained focused on healing rather than retribution. In interviews, he emphasized the importance of education and dialogue in addressing racial biases. "We can't fix everything overnight," he said during one televised appearance, "but we can start by acknowledging the problem and working together to create solutions." His words struck a chord with many, earning him admiration not only as a victim of injustice but also as a leader committed to positive change. For Daniels, the road ahead looked bleak. Suspended from duty and facing multiple charges, he spent his days holed up in his modest apartment, watching replays of the viral videos and reading hateful comments online. Each clip reinforced the reality of his actions, yet he clung to the belief that he was being unfairly targeted. His lawyer assured him they had a strong defense, arguing that Daniels had acted within his rights as a police officer. But as more Evidence surfaced and public sentiment turned overwhelmingly against him. Even his legal team began to doubt their chances of success. By the end of the third week, the town bore little resemblance to the quiet, unassuming place it once was. Conversations about race and policing dominated dinner tables, coffee shops, and town hall meetings. Local leaders called for unity, urging residents to channel their emotions into constructive action. Schools incorporated discussions about systemic racism into their curriculums, while businesses pledged to implement diversity initiatives. Slowly but surely, the seeds of change took root, nurtured by the courage of those willing to confront uncomfortable truths. Through it all, General Thompson emerged as a guiding light, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is always room for hope. While the scars of the incident would linger for years to come, so too would the lessons learned. For better or worse, the small town had become a microcosm of a nation grappling with its past and striving toward a brighter future. The weeks following Officer Mark Daniels' conviction brought a wave of change to the small town where the incident had unfolded. The verdict, delivered on that rainy afternoon, was more than just a legal outcome. It was a turning point that forced the community to confront uncomfortable truths about itself. For many residents, it was an opportunity to reflect, heal, and take meaningful steps toward progress. For others, it deepened existing divisions, sparking debates about fairness, accountability, and justice. General Marcus Thompson became a central figure in this period of transformation. Though he never sought the limelight, his calm demeanor and unwavering commitment to positive change made him a natural leader. He used his platform to advocate for reforms, traveling to nearby cities to speak at forums, schools, and community centers. His message was simple yet powerful. Systemic. Racism exists and addressing it requires collective effort. We can't fix everything overnight, he often said during these talks. But we can start by listening to each other and acknowledging the pain that has been ignored for too long. In response to public demand, local leaders organized town hall meetings aimed at fostering dialogue between residents and law enforcement. These gatherings were tense at first, with emotions running high on both sides. Officers expressed frustration over being painted as villains, while community members shared stories of mistreatment and fear. It wasn't easy, but slowly a sense of understanding began to emerge. One particularly impactful meeting featured General Thompson alongside Chief Harris, the newly appointed police chief, who had vowed to root out corruption within the department. Together, they outlined plans for mandatory bias training, body cameras for all officers, and stricter oversight mechanisms. Trust is earned, not given, Chief Harris emphasized, and we're committed to earning yours. These initiatives gained traction, thanks in part to General Thompson's advocacy. He partnered with civil rights organizations to push for statewide reforms, including legislation that would require independent investigations into cases of alleged police misconduct. His efforts inspired similar movements across the country, drawing attention to the urgent need for accountability in law enforcement. News outlets hailed him as a hero, not only for enduring the harrowing encounter with Daniels, but also for using his experience to drive meaningful change. For Daniels, life behind bars was a stark contrast to the authority he once wielded. Locked away from the world he had dominated, he struggled to come to terms with his new reality. Prison life stripped him of his identity as an officer, leaving him vulnerable and isolated. Fellow inmates mocked him, calling him "dirty cop," and blaming him for tarnishing their profession. Guards treated him with indifference, offering neither sympathy nor leniency. Days turned into months, and Daniels grew increasingly bitter, convinced that he had been unfairly targeted. He spent hours writing letters to his wife, Lisa, insisting on his innocence and urging her to fight for his release. But even she began to distance herself, unable to reconcile the man she loved with the one revealed through damning evidence. Daniel's family maintained a defiant stance, accusing the court system of failing him. They launched appeals, claiming prosecutorial misconduct, and arguing that the jury had been swayed by media sensationalism rather than facts. Their efforts garnered support from fringe groups that opposed what they called anti-police agendas. Protests cropped up sporadically, with demonstrators holding signs like "Back the Blue" and "Justice for Mark Daniels." While these rallies drew attention, they also reignited tensions within the community, pitting pro-reform advocates against those who believed Daniels had become a scapegoat. Despite these challenges, the momentum for change continued to grow. Schools incorporated discussions about racial biases into their curriculums, encouraging students to think critically about privilege and prejudice. Businesses pledged to diversify their workforces and implement anti-discrimination policies. Even religious institutions joined the movement, hosting workshops and prayer sessions focused on unity and reconciliation. The ripple effects of General Thompson's ordeal extended far beyond the courtroom, touching every corner of the town and inspiring action elsewhere. Back at home, General Thompson tried to return to some semblance of normalcy. Yet, reminders of the incident lingered everywhere. Strangers approached him at grocery stores and gas stations, thanking him for standing up against injustice. Veterans reached out to share their own stories of discrimination, seeking advice or simply expressing solidarity. While grateful for the support, Marcus sometimes felt overwhelmed by the weight of expectations placed upon him. Sarah noticed the toll it took on him, urging him to prioritize self-care. "You've done so much already," she told him one evening. "It's okay to step back when you need to." Even as he navigated his personal struggles, General Thompson remained steadfast in his mission. He collaborated with advocacy groups to create mentorship programs for young people affected by systemic racism, providing them with tools to navigate adversity and pursue leadership roles. He also worked closely with lawmakers to draft bills addressing inequities in policing practices. His tireless dedication earned him national recognition, culminating in an invitation to speak at a prestigious civil rights conference in Washington, D.C. Standing before a packed auditorium, he delivered a speech that resonated deeply with attendees. "Change begins with courage," he said, his voice steady and resolute. "Courage to face our flaws, courage to challenge the status quo, and courage to believe in a better future." Meanwhile, Daniels' imprisonment served as a cautionary tale for law enforcement agencies nationwide. Training academies began incorporating case studies of his actions into their curriculum, warning recruits about the dangers of unchecked prejudice. Discussions around de-escalation techniques and cultural sensitivity became standard practice, reflecting a growing awareness of the importance of building trust with communities. While some officers dismissed these measures as unnecessary bureaucracy, others embraced them, recognizing that real reform started with individual accountability. As time passed, the town slowly transformed. Conversations about race and policing shifted from heated arguments to constructive dialogues. Residents attended workshops together, learning how to address biases and foster empathy. Local businesses displayed banners promoting inclusivity, while schools celebrated diversity through art exhibits and storytelling events. Though scars remained, there was a renewed sense of hope, a belief that healing was possible if everyone played their part. For General Thompson, the journey was far from over. Though justice had been served in the courtroom, he knew true equality required ongoing effort. He continued to inspire others with his resilience, proving that even in the face of hatred, compassion could prevail. And for Daniels, locked away in a cell, the consequences of his actions served as a grim reminder of the power dynamics he had abused and the lives he had irreparably damaged. In the end, the story of Officer Mark Daniels and General Marcus Thompson transcended its origins as a single incident. It became a symbol of struggle and resilience, a testament to the enduring fight for justice and humanity. Whether viewed as a victory, a tragedy, or a catalyst for change, it left an indelible mark on all who witnessed it, a reminder that every action carries weight, and every voice matters in the pursuit of a fairer world. Months after the trial, the small town that had once been defined by its quiet anonymity found itself forever altered. The incident involving Officer Mark Daniels and General Marcus Thompson had not only exposed deep-seated racial divides, but also ignited a movement toward accountability and reform. As time passed, the initial shock of the verdict gave way to reflection, action, and, slowly, a sense of cautious optimism. For many, it was a reminder that justice, while imperfect, could still pave the way for healing and transformation. General Marcus Thompson continued to play a pivotal role in shaping the town's future. Though he never sought fame or recognition, his courage and resilience made him an enduring symbol of hope. He traveled extensively, speaking at conferences, universities, and community events about leadership, perseverance, and the importance of confronting systemic racism. His speeches were always grounded in humility, focusing less on himself and more on the collective responsibility to create change. "I didn't ask for this," he often said, gesturing to the crowds gathered before him. "But if sharing my story can help even one person feel seen or inspire someone to take action, then it's worth it." One of his most impactful initiatives was the creation of a mentorship program aimed at empowering young people from marginalized communities. Partnering with local schools and nonprofit organizations, General Thompson worked tirelessly to provide resources, guidance, and opportunities for students who might otherwise fall through the cracks. The program quickly gained traction, attracting volunteers and donors eager to support its mission. Participants spoke of how interacting with General Thompson changed their perspectives, not just on race and inequality, but also on their own potential. "He makes you believe you can do anything," one high school senior shared during a graduation ceremony where Thompson was the keynote speaker. "And he shows you how to get there." Meanwhile, the police department underwent significant changes under Chief Harris's leadership. Recognizing the need for transparency and trust, Harris implemented sweeping reforms designed to hold officers accountable while fostering stronger relationships with the community. Body cameras became mandatory, and footage was regularly reviewed by independent oversight committees. Bias training sessions were expanded, featuring guest speakers like General Thompson who shared personal stories to drive home the importance of empathy and understanding. Officers were encouraged to engage with residents outside of enforcement scenarios, attending neighborhood meetings, cultural festivals, and youth programs. Slowly but surely, perceptions began to shift, replacing fear with familiarity and distrust with dialogue. The ripple effects of these efforts extended far beyond the town's borders. News of the successful reforms caught the attention of policymakers and advocacy groups nationwide, sparking conversations about replicating similar models in other cities. Journalists wrote feature articles highlighting the town's journey, framing it as a blueprint for addressing systemic issues within law enforcement. Even critics of the initial verdict acknowledged the tangible progress being made, crediting General Thompson's leadership and Chief Harris's willingness to embrace change. For Officer Mark Daniels, however, life remained bleak. Behind bars, he struggled to reconcile his past actions with the reality of his present circumstances. Prison offered little solace. Instead, it amplified his anger and resentment. Fellow inmates mocked him relentlessly, calling him dirty cop and blaming him for tarnishing the reputation of law enforcement. Letters from supporters dwindled over time, leaving him feeling increasingly isolated. His wife, Lisa, visited sporadically, her visits growing shorter and quieter with each passing month. Eventually, she stopped coming altogether, unable to justify standing by a man whose prejudices had shattered so many lives, including hers. Daniels clung to the belief that he had been wrongfully convicted, convinced that public outrage rather than evidence had sealed his fate. He spent hours drafting appeals, pouring his frustrations onto paper in hopes of overturning the verdict. But legal experts reviewing his case found no grounds for reversal, citing overwhelming evidence against him. As months turned into years, Daniels' defiance gave way to resignation. He began reflecting on his choices, though whether out of genuine remorse or self-preservation remained unclear. In rare moments of vulnerability, he admitted to fellow inmates that he wished he could turn back time, but not because he regretted his racism or aggression. Rather, he lamented losing the power and authority he once held. Back in the town, the scars of the incident lingered, though they no longer defined daily life. Conversations about race and policing evolved from tense confrontations to collaborative problem-solving. Residents participated in workshops designed to address implicit biases, learning how to challenge stereotypes and build bridges across cultural divides. Local businesses adopted inclusive hiring practices, while schools introduced curriculums emphasizing diversity and social justice. Art murals depicting unity and resilience appeared on walls throughout the town, serving as visual reminders of the progress achieved and the work still ahead. General Thompson's family adapted to their new normal, balancing pride in his accomplishments with concern for his well-being. Sarah worried about the toll his activism took on him, urging him to set boundaries and prioritize rest. Their children, now young adults, expressed admiration for their father's dedication, often joining him at events to lend their support. Together they formed a tight-knit unit, weathering both criticism and praise with grace and determination. As the years rolled on, the town transformed into a model of resilience and renewal. It wasn't perfect. Tensions occasionally flared, and disagreements arose, but there was a shared commitment to moving forward together. The memory of the incident served as both a cautionary tale and a source of inspiration, reminding everyone of the power of accountability and the possibility of redemption. On the 5th anniversary of the trial, the town held a commemorative event to honor the progress made since that fateful evening. General Thompson delivered a speech reflecting on the journey from trauma to triumph. "We've come a long way," he said, scanning the diverse crowd gathered before him. "But our work is far from finished. Justice isn't just about punishing wrongdoing. It's about creating systems that uplift and protect everyone, and that requires all of us to keep pushing, keep listening, and keep believing in a better tomorrow." His words resonated deeply, drawing applause and tears alike. As the sun set over the horizon, casting golden light across the faces of those in attendance, there was a palpable sense of hope. The road ahead would undoubtedly have challenges, but the town had proven it could rise above adversity when united by purpose and compassion. In the end, the story of Officer Mark Daniels and General Marcus Thompson transcended its origins as a single moment of conflict. It became a testament to the enduring human spirit, a reminder that even in the darkest times, courage and resilience could spark meaningful change. Whether viewed as a tragedy, a victory, or a catalyst for growth, it left an indelible mark on all who witnessed it. And perhaps in some small way, it inspired others to confront their own biases, champion justice, and strive for a world where everyone could truly belong.